I'm going to introduce our panelists, and then I'm going to give David a chance to tell you a little bit about how it turned out for everybody. So I'll start with David. David Powell, who's president of Belltower Productions. He served as the associate pastor for communication here at First Baptist Church from 1993 until 2013. He's got over 40 years of experience in television and film production, and he has produced and directed musicals, music videos, documentaries, and narratives in the U.S. and abroad. And he is actually the force behind the movie you're seeing today. And thank God he's also a Georgia Bulldog fan. Amanda Roderman shares perspective from a 13-year history working in direct social services. She has experience working with individuals and families in several capacities, including emergency, financial, and food assistance, foster care, guardianship, and most recently in homeless services as a permanent supportive housing case manager. Amanda currently works at the Virginia Supportive Housing while also pursuing a master in social work at VCU and interning at the Virginia Housing Allowance. Dianne Wilmore has an Associate of Arts degree in Criminal Justice Law and Law Enforcement Administration from Cuyahoga? Is that close enough? Community College, a BS degree in Technical Education from the University of Akron, and a Master's in Higher Education Management, also from Akron. She is currently the Community Services Manager for Richmond Public Libraries and the Homeless Services Liaison for the City of Richmond. And Nancy Warman is currently in ministry as a part-time servant in crisis ministry at St. James Episcopal Church, and is the former director of servant ministry at St. James. She has service in a wide variety of servant ministries throughout the Episcopal Church in the city of Richmond for the last 41 years. She has been and still is heavily involved in community outreach efforts and helped co-found ACTS, which is Area Congregations Together in Service, a multi-faith organization that has helped thousands of individuals and families from falling into the destructive and devastating cycle of homelessness. So I want to thank you all for being here today. Thank you for taking time out of your weekend. David, I want to start with you and let you give us a brief rundown of what happened to these individuals. So if you will, use the mic there and give us a little rundown before we get started with the questions.
I'll just hope. Okay. DeMonte Cosby, Nut is his nickname, graduated and did get accepted to Warren Wilson College. And he's going to finish this year with a 4.0 average, doing really well. Good news, bad news. That's the good news. The bad news, bless his heart, he got to college and they said, "You want to play lacrosse?" He said, "What's lacrosse?" They took him out and he tore his ACL before he got to ride in his very first bike, and he hasn't been able to ride since. So he's going to finish at Warren Wilson, which is, I wasn't familiar with Warren Wilson. It's a small liberal arts college, like 600 students. I don't know if this is a fact, but I think he's the only person of color among the 600 students. I didn't see any others when I was there. But they accepted him, and he's beloved, and I stay in touch with him. He's whitewater rafting today, and he's a good place to do that. But doing really well. Unfortunately, just didn't get to follow through with the cycling dreams. Let's see. Katina Brake she and her kids did buy a house together and moved in, and we're doing fine. I think one of the younger daughter has moved out in another place, so I think there's just the three of them there, and maybe the granddaughter. And last I heard, they were looking at actually building something else. And her long-term goal is to build family generational wealth, which is one of the things that a lot of folks who are stuck in that cycle of poverty, and I'm not an expert on this, so some of the others can talk about that, but it's a big deal for them to be able to hand something over, and she's well on her path to doing that. got a job. She's working for the Richmond and Henrico Public Health District, whatever the title of that is, and doing really well. Vaughn Johnson is, you see him in the newspaper every now and then doing some mentoring or something, for the community. He's very community-minded. One of his dreams was to get his own barbershop, and he finally did. He found a place, and he's got his own shop now and doing really well. And TJ is my hero. You got the impression, I hope you did, from, and I'm sorry it cut off abruptly. I don't know exactly why. There's 30 more minutes to the film. But he is an entrepreneur like few I have ever seen. You got a sense of that from starting to sell toilet paper and then progressing. Well, he's written a second book. It's called Study Guide, and its target audience is kids that grew up in a situation just like he grew up in, that need some encouragement and how to get out of the cycle. So he's got that out on Amazon. You can buy it. Go on Amazon and search for Tavarius Thompson, and you'll see his 2 books there. He started a clothing line called Free Lunch. It's got shoes and shirts and caps and you name it. He is blowing and going and doing really well. Miss Gwen Harris, who was sort of the not narrator, but she kind of chapter marked these things for us, was the only one still living in public housing. She was in Creighton Court, and I'm afraid I don't know, that they were trying to move everybody out of Creighton Court, and I should have checked before I came here today to find out what her status is. I'm not sure if she's still there or if she's moved somewhere else. So that's kind of where everybody is.
Well, thank you, David, for that update, and I'm sorry I don't know what happened to the film either, but last night here we had a discussion about racism and racial equality, and we saw a film called When the Monuments Came Down, and it was also based here in Richmond. So a lot of the talk was about inequality, racial inequality especially. So one of my first questions to you on the panel, and you all just answer as you feel led. You don't have to answer every question if you don't want, but does racial inequality lead to poverty the majority of the time? Or are they two separate issues?
I can share that.
If you would take the mic out and just hold it past the mic, please, because it's kind of hard to hear. Thank you.
So I can share. I think it's. I don't think you can separate racism from other types of inequality and poverty. I'd say that's because inequality is kind of the root of a lot of forms of oppression, and it's telling that association because I have a lot of statistics from my internship, but 80% of households that are at the 50% or less median income level are people of color. So you can't separate out, the history and the systems of oppression that have set up people of color and other groups to have larger barriers than others.
Well, I would agree. I would also say, though, I think this film certainly also tells us that inequality doesn't have to lead to poverty. Certainly it does in many, many cases, but even folks who experience inequality, in some cases, as in this film, have an opportunity to do what they need to do to get it right. And that's the good news. That's the hope, I think. Certainly, I don't think there's any question in my mind that inequality certainly is a very difficult thing in very much a part of folks who don't have what they need, not having enough to make ends meet or to live substantial and productive lives, no question. But thank goodness that there are people in the world who can help, particularly young people, get on another path and overcome all the variables that hit their life because of inequality.
Okay, I totally agree that it's all connected. Let me let you know a little bit about my background because I grew up in the projects also, so I know firsthand how those two are so interconnected. And like both of my panelists indicated, there are variables that affect that and to what extent. It depends on what resources and services you have available, who reaches out, who supports, and that will determine some hopeful, positive outcomes, but sometimes it doesn't, as indicated in the news and whatever. So yes, it is definitely connected.
Steve, if I could just have one other thing to add to that. I have a copy of information from the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Planning and Evaluation, which of course is a part of Health and Human Services, U.S. Health and Human Services. And I won't take time now to go into further stats, but you could ask me later if you're interested. But the big title is COVID-19 and Economic Opportunity, Unequal Effects on Economic Need and Program Response. And it gives in detail the different percentages relating to the effects of COVID on white folks, Black people, and Hispanic people. And clearly, I think it says that inequality is a big part of what happens. That makes these situations even worse than what they might be.
All right, so we've established that inequality is a contributing factor to poverty, but for somebody in poverty, and this is from your perspectives, from your backgrounds, from your dealing with people, how does poverty really affect someone's life?
Okay, growing up in the projects, we didn't know we were in poverty, so we didn't think we were affected. I grew up in the projects at the time that I'm from, a little bit about my history, I'm from Cleveland, Ohio, so it's a little bit different, our projects here and the projects there, but just a little information about me. My mom and dad got divorced. My mom moved to the projects at that time in the late 70s, early 80s. The projects, it was about 50-50 ratio, white and Black. So we didn't even know we lived in the projects. I didn't know until I got into high school because it was a mixed area. It was fine. We didn't have a high crime rate. So I guess if everybody is in poverty and you're all living around each other, you don't know that. You don't know what's available because we all live in that, and we had a structured families, and we did things, our community center, and all those things. And I'm going back to the question about what am I saying?
How does it affect someone's life?
So it became paramount to me because, like I said, I didn't know until it was time for me to graduate from high school. And at the time, my white friends were going to college. And I sat down with my vocational advisor, and they told me that I was going to be a checker in a grocery store. No, I wouldn't go to college with them. I didn't know what college was. Didn't have a clue because we were all we lived all in the projects, but when they integrated the bus system, they put me in a different class because we're bused to the west side, and all those folks over there was going to college. So I'm thinking, I want to go to college too. The first time that I knew that there was some equality, when somebody sits you down and they tell you what you're going to be. Well, you know, Dianne, you're going to be a checker at the grocery store, and then maybe in 10 years you could be head checker, and then when you retire, maybe you could be the assistant manager. My counselor had my life planned out for me. No, I'm going to college. And it became where the poverty hit is because now she says, okay, well, you're going to college, how are you going to pay for it? Because they had put us on a vocational track, the lower income students, because they didn't, I don't know if they thought we had the aptitude to succeed in college or whatever, so we couldn't get in college. Our grades were, first of all, our classes were not aimed to go to college. They weren't college prep courses, they were vocational courses. So the admissions, when we started filling out admission papers, they were like, no. The only way I got into college is I had to work really hard that summer, well, 2 summers, and I was able to go to a community college on academic probation. That's the only way. And I had to pay for that. So while I was going to community college on academic probation, I had to work. So that's when you talk about poverty and trying to go to school and do those things and trying to maintain, that's when it became apparent to me.
Thank you for sharing it. Yeah. So when I think about how poverty affects someone's life, I view it as, poverty is trauma. So it sounds like you had a really strong community that helped to control for some of that and make you so resilient. But growing up in that circumstances is trauma, and it impacts quality of life. It puts you in survival mode. That's something that I, haven't experienced personally, but that I see through working with my clients. And it can take a lifetime to break out of the survival mode, or maybe they don't. And so it impacts their mental health, and then it also impacts the options and the choices that you can make for yourself.
I would just chime in and say you can't know what you don't know. And doing this film, if it didn't teach me anything else, it taught me a bit of humility to not assume that I understood where everybody was coming from. I was just the opposite. I'm 71 years old, so when I graduated from high school in 1969, of course I'm going to college. I'm a middle-class white guy. That's what you do, right? And I had no reason to ever question those assumptions, because everybody around me is middle-class white. And a lot of us grow up in these silos and never realize we're in a silo and what other folks encounter every day of their lives. I never had my parents sit me down to say, now let me tell you how to handle when you get stopped by a police officer when you're driving. Never had the talk. But I learned from all these folks that we included in the film how that talk goes, and I witnessed firsthand some of those experiences that those folks went to. I had no clue. And so humility, I think, is one of the things that we can carry with us to realize that we just don't know, and we don't have a frame of reference. And so when somebody talks about their experience, it behooves us to listen and to say, oh, okay, I had no idea.
I think that one of the things I have recognized over the years as I've worked with folks is also, in many cases, the lack of hope. And because I serve from a faith-based perspective, compassion and hope are big variables in the way we go about serving and trying to assist. I've often told folks as I've done presentations like this that one of the things I recognized early on, and I'm relating to what Amanda said about the traumatic effect of people who don't have what they need and who feel trapped and who have really lost a sense of hope of being anything different or being anywhere different, is sometimes people will call in crises and they will be very emotional about it, and that's understandable. But the tell sign of the trauma they're going through and the fear they fear in that moment of desperation and helplessness is, once I say, we will help you with this, we will assist, they sometimes just break down and sob. And it's at that point that I realize just how traumatic and fearful their life situation is. So I think in addition to embracing folks with the material need, there's always the powerful need to assist with the spiritual and the emotional, and to give that sense of hope that hopefully somehow balances a little bit with the trauma they're experiencing.
Okay. Well, I want to kind of piggyback off that a little bit. We hear the term generational poverty, which means just one generation to the next, to the next, to the next, lives in poverty. You get embedded in that mindset, that system. What are some of the other barriers? If you're in poverty and you have besides just drive and desire, what are some of the barriers that are there that prevent people from just saying, I'm tired of being poor and I'm going to be okay tomorrow? What are some of those barriers that they face other than the ones you've already mentioned?
Well, I would say certainly lack of adequate education, lack of appropriate jobs for individuals. Those would be two of the leading things. And again, I think it's that sense of hopelessness that sometimes holds people back, and I think that was brought out in the film, that one of the barriers is just believing that there is an alternative way for you, believing in yourself and believing in a world that will give you an opportunity. I think that's one of the biggest barriers that I see in working with folks.
I'm gonna agree with that. The lack of education or educational opportunities, the workforce development opportunities. I think also it's, we have a lot of agencies out here trying to do something, or we have a lot of services and resources, but when I talk to homeless or unsheltered individuals, the biggest complaint is they haven't got back to us. It's taken a long time. I don't feel, when they reach out, they want that immediate. Sometimes things are not immediate, so they fall into that hopelessness and desperate pattern and do something else. That also sets up them to be distrustful of the system. They're not really ready to even ask for help sometimes if they have other things that have prevented them from getting help, like say you might have a warrant or you're late on your child support, any of those things that might block them from really coming up and saying, hey, I need help. I run into a lot of mothers that are homeless, sleeping in their cars with their children because they don't want the schools to know, or the police to know, or the Department of Social Services to know, because they feel that their children will be taken away from them. That's not true, but that's what they think. So it's the lack of education about what we will do as a community and other resources that will help them.
I think that was all right on. Another barrier, though, when I think of it that way, is just the way that the systems are built sometimes. So the services that are, there to help folks that are feeling hopeless or in some type of crisis, and they're not always accessible because they're probably built by somebody, that doesn't understand their position. So it feels monumental to try and access the services, if we have enough services, because they're built with barriers, maybe intentionally, sometimes unintentionally, but it makes them hard. It makes it hard for them to access because they were built by someone, without their perspective in mind.
Steve?
Let me say this again, that's exactly true. So if you're a person that's in crisis and you see a number or you have an outreach worker come out to you and they say, hey, we need you to call. First of all, that person is gonna need a phone, right? And they might call the agency and the agency say, okay, we'll call you back because we got 2 or 3 people ahead of you. But then what if their phone needs to be charged? They don't have any place to charge it. It's a lot of things that we have that we just, take for granted. Okay, got a phone, we're gonna charge it. But if somebody's homeless or suffering or in crisis or whatever, they might not have a phone, they don't have anywhere to charge it. All those things are barriers.
Yeah, and I have found, I was going to piggyback off what Amanda said, in trying to help people sometimes even fill out a form to get food stamps. The form's like 5 pages long. And, you get into more when you start to get into housing and Medicaid and all this other stuff. So the bureaucracy, pronounce that right, of someone in poverty. And like Nancy said, you've already got all that baggage on the emotional stuff, the spiritual stuff, the whatever, and then you're trying to climb this mountain with that baggage already on, and you're meeting these barriers everywhere you go that make it more and more difficult. Plus, you got the systemic part out there that says, like Dianne said, you're not going to make it. Stay where you are and live life and be happy. And, it's just, that's why I admire this film, David, of these individuals who said, I'm not listening to that. And it's a journey. And it's like, I can't remember her name, the one that said, everybody thinks if you look at a film, you think, oh, she went from here to here in no time. But it's a journey, and it's hard work. But she did it. And that's what made this film, to me, so inspiring, is to see people who didn't take all the advice they were given about stay where you are. They made a difference. We're going to end the Q&A part with the panel for one more question, then I'm going to open it up to you all for questions and comments. We've heard and we've seen about people in poverty, and we know that poverty is a systemic issue. Just like last night when we talked about racism, and sometimes those problems seem so big. And sometimes they don't directly affect us, but we want to do something to help. What can we do? The average person out here, what can we do to help people who are in poverty who want to get out?
I feel very underqualified to address that big issue, but I will say that one of the things that I observed in doing this film is, these were all pretty much success stories, but there are a lot of stories that aren't success stories. And my observation in the 2.5-year journey of doing this film was that somebody who serves a role of believing in these people, mentoring, encouraging, saying, yes, you can, makes a world of difference. In 2 of the cases, it was a mom. TJ and Nut, had very strong mother influence. And you talk to them about why they are where they are. Mom, I don't want to disappoint Mom. Mom believed in me. And in other cases, it's a friend, or a teacher or something like that. But that, I found that to be, in my limited exploration, a common factor, is that somebody came alongside and invested belief and long-term partnership in somebody to help them break out of that cycle.
If I could piggyback on that, I'm gonna tell a little story that maybe I shouldn't be telling, but Jim Ucroft is a member of St. James's where I serve, and as most of us know, Jim and the Ucroft family have invested so very much into our community, and Jim particularly is all about wanting to help folks, and so it's not unusual for Jim to pull me aside on a Sunday morning and whisper something in my ear, and it's always with another vision that he's had or another idea, or Nancy, what do you think about that? Do you think we could do that? Which is delightful to hear his imagination and his care and interest in helping in our community. But one of the things that Jim has always said, and I really have more and more come to believe he's right, and this piggybacks, David, on what you're saying, and certainly on what the film portrayed, is every kid in our community needs a one-on-one mentor from kindergarten all the way through high school. That if we could imagine every child having an opportunity throughout his or her educational primary years through junior and senior year, to have an adult who could be there for them apart from family, to have an adult who really helped them feel valued and feel that they had someone to guide them and direct them. Can you just imagine that? I mean, it's probably fantasy land to some extent in terms of it happening, but I do think, and seeing this film even, I think, echoes that more, that the kids in today's world need somebody to be with them, to hold their hands and to help them believe in themselves and to be an advocate for them. And I've come to believe that short of that, I'm not sure we can get too much further down the road with helping poverty. I just think that they need that one-on-one guidance.
I totally agree with that. The mentorship is key and vital. I remember even with myself, my mom and dad, neither one of them graduated from high school, so they were just happy that I graduated. I was my first, first person to graduate from high school, so they thought I had, the brass ball because I graduated from high school, so they couldn't look beyond, when I told them that I was going to college, they was like, for what? They just didn't have any perception about why do you need to go to college? You've done more than we've done, so you should be good. And at that point, my dad had got a job at Ford, and at that time, he could get a job at Ford without a college degree because they were just looking for laborers. So he had me just lined up to an internship, and I was like, I don't want to work at Ford. I want to go to college. So I had a mentor in high school that said, if you want to go to college, we're going to try to make that happen. We're going to make it happen. So that's why it's important that you do have that. And like my panelist said, the sooner the better. Also, when we talk about racism, and I know everybody is like, oh, I want to, be on this committee, and I want to be on that committee, and we can do this, and we can have all the mentorship programs, but I think what's important that everybody, when you see a racist act, or you see someone making a racist remark or incident, you need to say something. You need to correct that person. You need to let them know it's inappropriate, And I think if we all would do that, it would help shine light on this systemic racism and help us move forward.
In addition to, those meaningful one-on-one relationships, I think we also need to, put pressure on our political leaders to invest in programs or restructure programs so that they have the most benefit to the people that need them. I'll use an example for my work as a housing case manager. Permit swap housing is a model that is proven, researched, it helps alleviate homelessness. However, we need resources to fund for the vouchers, to pay the case managers, and now what we're running into is we don't have affordable housing to even use those vouchers to house the people we're trying to help. So that money comes from the federal government, and we have state funding as well. So I think we need to communicate our values as constituents. And we're all here at a Justice Film Festival, so we need to, voice that to our leaders because they need to hear the pressure that we care about these things and fund them properly so that they can do the work that they're meant to do.
Okay, thank you. All right, now we're going to take some questions from the audience here. So you can direct them to the whole panel or just to an individual if you want.
Mine is to the whole panel. I believe that the systemic racism, injustice, poverty is because the white folks all moved to the suburbs. You can buy all the Band-Aids, you can have all the programs. But if I put people in Gilpin Court, Creighton Court, Blackwell, I've already told them something. I can mentor them forever, but I've told them something to start with. You live over here, I live out here, my schools, my education, my whatever. Do you believe that truly integrated neighborhoods are beneficial? Dianne probably is better at answering this than others because of her race. Or do you think that it creates more animosity? My children grew up in an integrated neighborhood and don't know the difference in black and white. They have no clue. And are really offended when they used to go to my parents' house, and my parents' house, the words were just different. Your take,
Dianne. You're right, it did send a message when the courts were made, and I think, and I'm not sure who can kind of help me with this, they built the projects, I guess, for returning veterans initially, and that was what it was supposed to be for, and then it changed, and then we got our African American population there, so yes, and a definite message. I think as and you talk about white people moving in the suburbs or out, but now we're looking at a lot of gentrification. They're coming back into the city. So it's so difficult because I want to say integration is a great thing, but it's an education. It's hard when you're living with just your people and it's a certain culture in the projects. It's a certain culture, what they live by. They have no idea what's on the outside of that, but I think it's going to take both of us trying to live together. It's going to be some re-education. We talk about affordable housing and things like that. I think there's, as it becomes available, whenever it becomes available, we need to have a certain percentage of mixed housing to kind of ease that process in. It's and let me tell you about this. So 8 years ago, I came from Cleveland. I'm the library administrator on North Avenue. When I got here in Virginia, it was like 95% on North Avenue. Now it's 60-40, and it is slowly changing. We have houses over there, 300, 400, almost $500,000. So I've seen my library, or the city's library, which I'm administrator for, have changed. The whole demographics have changed in the 8 years that I've been here. So, and as I see the community changes, like I said, it's about white folks coming in. We all have to live together. How are we going to do that? And it's been some struggle. It has been some struggle. So I just think it's just, we're going to have to take it, you know, we put programs in place. We, you know, we hope that that everybody is receptive and can deal with this changing demographic, but it's going to be tough. But I think it can be done.
I don't know if you all have seen presentations by Ben Campbell and John Meeser on the history of how the city was developed, and particularly of the projects. And what they will say to you and will outline in Ben's book and in their presentation is that the projects in various areas in the city were intentionally built that way so that there would be a division between black and white. And I bring that up simply to say so many years of history of that. And so to that point, you know, when you go to undo something that's been ingrained into people for years and years, it's going to take years and years to undo it and to move to the point of what Dianne was talking about. And yes, let's hope and pray it will happen and that it is beginning to happen. But I think it goes back to education for all of us, that we all need to be exposed to the realities of life for everyone. I mean, Amanda, when you were talking about the political arena and how politicians being more educated, I think, you know, it should be a requirement that every politician at every level see this film as an example. So, but just to point out that history that Ben and John will show very clearly was very intentional, you know, for years and years. That's the way it was set.
Yeah, and part of that thing that you're talking about, that intentional section, was not only, it was about racism, but it was also to isolate poverty into one area to get it out of the public view, because they said that they wanted Richmond to be a place that people came to, and you wouldn't come to a place that had poverty everywhere. So they isolated it all out of sight, out of mind. Okay, Vicki has a question.
There must be white people who live in poverty. And I'm wondering why projects aren't more integrated. I mean, if people are giving vouchers to people to live, do they not give them vouchers to live in the projects? Or do they find them a place outside of the projects? I think if we could integrate the projects as they are today, there might be more or less racial divide. Because then we're kind of equal. Not that I believe in the projects, but I'm just saying that if we could integrate the projects, then maybe we could start saying, well, you know, we both live on the same side of the street. Just curious to know why we don't do that.
I don't know the reason why we don't do that, but I do just want to point out that there's an over-representation of people of color in public housing and in the projects. So of course there are white people in poverty, but it's not representative of the population. So what we see is more black people in the projects because there's an over-representation of poverty and a need based on that demographic.
Also, I'm gonna say, because if you're a white person and you have a housing voucher, it's not just good for the projects, it's good for any apartment or dwelling you want to go. And because white people might have families that they can transition with until their housing vouchers become, available in those other communities where Black folks don't have that kind of family support or monies to not go to the projects. I think that is a major factor as to why you find more Black families than white. I'm not saying it's not any white families, just like homelessness. It is homeless white folks and it's homeless Black folks, you know what I'm saying? And it seems to be, as I go out there and you talk about poverty, and everybody has a story about homelessness, and when I talk to them, white or Black, it's just that they have had a bump in the road, but for as far as the projects, I just don't believe that Black people have the resources to and the services that are available as white people. And that's probably why you don't see them in the projects.
This is not a particular answer to that question, but relates another area that I'm seeing in my service to people that really is Black and white issue is the needs of elderly people who are on fixed incomes, and as food and gas and clothing and everything else goes up, their income stays pretty stabilized, and more and more I'm seeing that, and that, at least from my perspective with the clients I have, that's not a Black-white issue necessarily, that's across the board.
Okay, we got time for one more question back here, please.
I was gonna ask, I had a couple of questions, but Dianne, one specifically for you, is transportation, having been in Cleveland and here also, was transportation an issue there in the projects and getting to school, community college, or getting to a job, or is transportation a big issue there? And is it more of an issue here for people that live in poverty because of the way it was potentially segregated differently than maybe some other projects or other communities with poverty separated like that?
Okay, let me say this. In Cleveland, our projects are all on the bus line. So we have one community college that was downtown, so we could all get there. The projects I lived at, I could walk across the bridge to get to the community college downtown. What I can say about Richmond, and they stepped up, the GRTC here now you can ride free until 2025. So there's no reason where anybody can't get anywhere that GRTC goes. So I'm seeing that improvement. Like I said, COVID has changed how we move, in this city and how we address those transportation concerns. So yes, it's improving, yes.
Steve, I'd like to ask a question if you don't mind, and anyone out there could answer, or my panelist friends. One of the things that I've noticed over the years, and I thought about this again looking at the film, in the film there was a good bit of discussion about how in the projects particularly it was like a family, the whole community, in that people took care of people. And if you didn't have enough groceries, your neighbor had some groceries, and maybe if you needed to go somewhere, a neighbor would take you, so forth and so on. I would say for the past 10 years probably, what I've noticed with folks that I work with is there doesn't seem to be that same sense of community about people helping their own people within a given area. I used to have clients who would come to the church, would have to get a neighbor to bring them, for example, transportation, and that would work fine. But I began to realize if a neighbor brought somebody, the neighbor expected to be paid. And that still seems to be the mentality, and I just wondered if you all have any ideas about that, or anybody in the audience either.
you heard a lot of the nostalgia that some of the people in the film expressed about the good old days. Miss Gwen was talking about growing up in Jackson Ward and what a family, was, and Vaughn was visiting his old apartment and talking about there's Channel 6, Channel 8, Channel 12. Yeah, and they all say things have changed. And, what are the reasons? Drugs are more of a problem. I think that is a major problem. And these things right here, we're kind of turning in on ourselves more instead of talking to people face to face, we'll send them a text. So I'm not an expert on that, but there is a difference, and people who've grown up in those communities have noticed it and talk about it, how different it is now than it was 10, 15 years ago, certainly 50 years ago.
I'm gonna say this also, with the crime and people don't wanna go outside in those projects and things that are going on, crime, drugs, that type of thing. But even where I live at, I don't know my neighbor. And we were just talking about this at a staff meeting where we, even not living in the projects now, and people that live next door to you, do you really know them? And I like to ask people out in the audience, because I have friends that have lived next door to their neighbors, don't know their name. And I'm like, how is that possible? Because you might need something. What happened to those days of going over and getting some sugar and all of that? So I'm very curious about that. I just don't think it just is because you're in the projects. I'm thinking it's affecting other areas.
I just want to say, I think that the idea that, we're not as a community, as we grew up, older people grew up, used to run the neighborhoods, people were free to go around and go to different communities and go into town and ride your bikes everywhere, and I certainly raised my daughter not like that. You could go certainly this far, and it's just not as safe as place. So, and I don't know if that addresses people charging for transportation, but as far as just feeling more community-centered and safer, that people have access everywhere, I don't think as a society we feel that way today. Whether the crime's worse everywhere or whether we just know about it, I think it's complicated, and I think that's also inclusive of our neighborhoods and knowing our neighbors. I don't really know my neighbors in my neighborhood, and I've been there 6 years now, so, yeah.
Yeah, and I have the same thing, right? Oh, hold on, Vicky's got something.
I was gonna say, I've lived in my neighborhood on my block for over 30 years. And when I moved onto that block, we knew everybody. We knew every kid, we knew every neighbor. We could go next door and borrow an egg or a cup of milk or something like that. But what has happened is, I noticed this trend that people were starting to put up fences because maybe they had a pet. But then, because we all had those wire fences or whatever you call them, those metal fences around our yards when I first moved in. And then one neighbor put up a tall fence on their side. And then the other neighbor put up a tall fence on their side. And then their neighbors put up a fence. So it's kind of like, if you can't talk to your neighbor over the fence, it's kind of difficult to develop a relationship. And I think because we are living at a different rate or a pace, it's like we used to be able to talk when we went to our car in the mornings. Well, I think what somebody was saying is, now we have our cell phones. So we're so busy when we go to our cars to get back on our cell phone that we don't take the time to wave to our neighbor. One of the things that I do is at least once a year, I have a cookout in my backyard and it says, every neighbor must come. And so, and it's probably, and then I don't see them again until the next year. And it's just a very weird phenomenon, but I totally understand where you're coming from.
one thing we have done is when we have family meals, and I'm talking about children, cousins, we have a basket at the front door. Your phone has to go in it when you come in the door. Cannot be accessed the entire time that we're, and you would be amazed how cohesive the group becomes. Because if not,
Yeah, I think it's, you've expressed several reasons why, and I think all of them are true. I think it's multiple reasons that we've become more isolated as a society. I don't think it's any one thing. And I think that's one of the issues that leads to the problems we have today as it relates to social justice. The more isolated we become, the more selfish we become, the more focused on just us, and we neglect the problems around us. And I talked with a man not long ago, and this is going back to last night's discussion, and I apologize for that, but I was talking to a man not long ago, and we were talking about the race issue. And I asked him, was he racist? And he said, no, I'm not racist. And I said, well, tell me about how you react. And I gave him several scenarios, and every one, it pretty much came across that he was racist. But he said, the long story is, he grew up that way, and he was in his community, and the more he became isolated in that community, the more he started to accepting what that community said. He didn't get out and connect with people. And, the whole thing about some of these systemic issues is they seem big. Whether you're talking about racism, whether you're talking about poverty, whether you're talking about any of the other social issues, they seem huge. And we sit in this room here at First Baptist, and we've heard some great advice and some great things, but sometimes we sit there and go, that's just too big to deal with. But I got news for you today, it's not. And as I told the group last night, everybody in this room can make a difference. You have to find what it is that you can do. That's what these four folks have done. They have found what they can do. You don't have to go and live somewhere in poverty, not necessarily, but if that's what you're called to do, then do it. But if you're called to do whatever, do it with passion and have in your heart to make a difference. Because just think, if everybody got outside their door and everybody started to connect and everybody started to help, we might find that utopian society somewhere. Doubtful, but if everybody does their part, we can make a difference. And you did part of your part today by coming here. And I thank you very much for being here today. I want to thank my panel for being here, and also for everything that you do in your way. You are making a difference. And sometimes you may go, gosh, I don't feel like I am. I know Nancy and I have had many discussions about, we see the same people over and over and over again. But sometimes just being there for somebody is what you need to do. So thank you all. Thank you all. In about 40 minutes is our next film. It's going to be Sex Trafficking in America. We're going to be looking at human trafficking. You may not know this, but Richmond is one of the top 10 cities in the United States as it relates to human trafficking. It's one of those things, once again, that is all around us, and probably, two people in this room might say, oh yeah, I've seen that. Because it's one of those things that takes place around us, and we don't recognize it. So if you want to participate in that, take a break, go get you something to drink water, be back here at 4 o'clock, and we've got a great panel.
Is the next documentary specific to Richmond?
No, this one is Sex Trafficking in America, so it talks about the problem.
Okay.
But hopefully some of the people of course our panel are people who focus on here in the Richmond area. So there'll be some good information there. So thank you all so much. God bless you and have a great day.